Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony Burek. I am a project specialist with OTAN, the Outreach and Technical Assistance Network. And I welcome you today to my presentation, Digital Resources for EL Civics Assessments. So as we get started, I wanted to let you know about the agenda for this presentation. First, I want to tell you a little bit about OTAN if you already don't know about my organization. And then we will cover a starting point that will be kind of the main focus of our presentation today. I'm also going to ask you to take a survey offline. And then the bulk of our presentation is going to be about the digital resources for EL Civics assessments. I'm also going to provide you with some additional resources that I think might be useful for you, not only for EL Civics, but you might also be able to use them in your instruction as well. And then we'll do a wrap up at the end. And then I wanted to point out that I have all of my resources that I'm going to talk about today on a Google site. And you can see the address for the Google site. It's bit.ly/2021, capital ELC, and then lowercase digits. So if you want to take a moment to go ahead and open up a browser and go to that website, again, bit.ly/2021, capital ELC, and then lowercase digits, you'll be able to open up all of the resources that I'm going to share with you today. And when you go to my Google site, you should see the title of the website the title of the presentation, Digital Resources for EL Civics Assessments, at the top of the Google site. Again, there's the address, and then below that, you'll see all the documents, so including these slides and then the other resources that I'm going to introduce today. So before I get into the presentation, I just wanted to give you a little bit of information about OTAN. So you may know that in California for adult education, there are 3 state leadership projects. CalPro is one, CASAS, the host of the EL Civics Conference, is the second one, and then OTAN is the 3rd state leadership project. And all of our organizations are meant to provide service to all of you adult educators in the field, so please reach out to any and all of our organizations. We are more than happy to meet with you and talk about your needs. OTAN is specifically in the realm of training for technology tools, learning how to integrate technology into your instruction, into your instructional programs at your school. So that's really the best reason to reach out to us. And OTAN provides a lot of services and products. A good place to start is the OTAN website, otan.us, and you can get a lot of information, again, for your classroom, for your instructional program, and about technology in general. So we really invite you to visit the OTAN website for more information. Okay, so again, to return to today's presentation, Digital Resources for EL Civics Assessments. The starting point for this presentation is actually listed on the EL Civics website when you go to get the information about the CoApps. So as you become more familiar with the CoApps that are listed on the CASAS website, you'll see this language kind of repeated throughout the CoApps, and basically it goes something like this. So optimally, and then fill in the blank with the activity, so it could be a list, it could be a chart, it could be an application, it could be a form, it could be a report, it could be a letter. There are many other options as well, but basically the blank will be created or completed on a computer. So that's the first part. And then the second part is that whatever this is will be sent to the assessor electronically. Now, just a little bit of background about this presentation. We find ourselves at the beginning of 2021, still in the middle of what I call COVID times, what others call COVID times as well. But the first time I did this presentation, I did this right before, maybe a month or so before we actually, as a state and as a country and as a world, went into quarantine and lockdown. So the first time I presented this presentation, I was speaking with the teachers in the room, and I wanted them to think about, for their own EL Civics program, where they might rate their program on a scale of 1 to 10, given these two requirements, so that something will be created or completed on a computer, and then that creation would be sent to an assessor electronically. So in most cases, educators at the time, sort of pre-COVID, marked somewhere between 1 and 5, right? So maybe they were already having students work on the computer to do their creations. Maybe some of them, some of the students were actually able to send whatever it was they had created to the assessor electronically, or perhaps if it was a Google form activity or something that was in an LMS like Canvas or Moodle or Google Classroom, this creation would have been sent to the assessor electronically automatically as a function of the LMS. So what I tended to find, though, was that a lot of people were kind of on the left-hand side of the scale, really somewhere between 1 and 5. There wasn't a lot of use of to do EL Civics assessments, and certainly not a lot of sending it to someone via an electronic mechanism, so email, for example, or an LMS submission. Fast forward a year, a year of, or almost a year at this point, of distance learning, basically everybody working from home, and both teachers and students really trying to figure out how to continue teaching and learning using a computer, being online. So I wonder, kind of think about this for yourself and maybe for your agency, maybe other agencies that you might be familiar with. Where would you rate your agency on the scale from 1 to 10, sort of 1 being minimal and 10 being maximum? And I suspect that maybe for a lot of teachers across the state, they might find themselves more towards the right-hand side of the scale a year later, after a very unusual circumstance of all of us having to be online for almost the last year. But again, I think this scale is really important to kind of keep in the back of your mind. So not only for today, right, and the rest of the 2021 school year, but really thinking about, the future, when we go back to our classrooms, when we go back to our schools, when we go back to in-person instruction, it's going to be a very different environment than what we knew before. And for example, for those of us at OTAN and other organizations that are interested in the use of technology and instruction, we're really hoping that teachers will really consider what we call a blended learning environment. And that is, it's a combination of in-person instruction and online instruction. And in blended learning, there are many different models that are out there. There isn't kind of one size fits all when it comes to blended learning. But I think that, for those of us at OTAN and other organizations, we're really hoping that all of you and all of the experience, and not just you, but your students as well. So all of you will be able to bring back this technology experience that you've had over the last year or so, and think about how to integrate that experience into your instruction moving forward, so that we don't go back to a time where we abandon the technology, but we really hopefully have seen the value of technology over the last year or so. And we really think about how do we make that a standard part of our practice moving forward on a daily basis. So really our hope in the future is that, if I was to do this presentation again in a year's time, hopefully we would be back in person at our schools, fingers crossed, but B, we would be looking at teachers and students working in a blended learning environment and a lot more integration of technology into the classroom than there was previously. So I'd like you to keep this scale in mind as we proceed through the rest of the presentation, and really think about, if you don't feel like you're on the right-hand side of the scale, maybe you still feel like you're on the left-hand side of the scale, somewhere between 1 and 5, how do you think you might be able to move up the scale to the 6 to 10 range moving forward? And really the 6 to 10 means that you're really using technology intentionally as a part of the EL Civics assessments that you're going to be doing in the future. Okay, so I am interested actually, I know that this is an asynchronous presentation, but I am interested in a little bit of feedback from you for the purposes of this presentation. So if you might want to take a second and maybe just pause the presentation in a second or two. But what I'd like you to do is navigate to the Google form that you'll find on the Google site, again, bit.ly/2021, capital ELC, lowercase digits. If you scroll down the Google site a little bit, you should see a link to a survey. And again, I'd like you to maybe pause the presentation and go ahead and fill out that survey. When you come to the survey, you'll see these directions at the top of the survey on digital resources. Basically, you'll see a list of 8 different activities. What I'd like you to do is maybe select one or a couple of the activities there and do 2 things. Number 1, name a tech tool that students are currently using to complete the activity. And then number 2, say something about how the students deliver the completed activity to you as the teacher, or maybe if you have an assistant in the class, how are they sending that to the assistant? I'd be really interested in getting that information just to kind of see where you all are at these, in these days. And when I do the live Zoom presentation, hopefully I'll have a chance to take a look at that survey and share the results with those of you who would be interested in joining that Zoom live presentation. So again, if you want to go ahead and just pause the presentation at this point and complete that survey and then come back for the rest of the presentation. Okay, so when we talk about using technology and digital resources to complete the EL Civics assessments, we definitely have to ask ourselves some questions in the beginning, right? And I think a big question right now is, what if my students don't have the digital skills necessary to do the assessments that I would like them to do? Now, again, pre-COVID, I think, if we talked about pre-COVID about a year ago or so, and we talked about now, I think we really would see 2 very different situations, right? So pre-COVID, it's possible that really you as a teacher and maybe other teachers at your school didn't really use technology a lot in the classroom for assessments, things like that, right? And maybe it was a situation where you felt like your students in general did not have a lot of the digital skills necessary to do the assessments, okay? Fast forward a year of the remote teaching and learning that we've been doing in COVID times. And I'm hoping that, maybe not only for yourself, but for your students as well, like you really feel a lot more technologically proficient and savvy than you did a year ago or so, right? But we know that our programs are, open entry, open exit. Students are coming and going all the time. We get new students into our classrooms, both online and in face-to-face settings. And those students really don't have the digital skills necessary to not only do EL Civics assessments, but maybe a whole range of activities that you would hope to do with students in your class. So one of the documents that I've included on the Google site is what I'm calling the notes document. And if you open up the notes document and go to page 1, I've listed some options for you to consider that will help you and your students acquire some of those digital skills necessary to do the EL Civics assessment. So if you go to the page 1 of that notes document, and the top of that document is going to look like this. So it's called Digital Resources for EL Civics Assessments, otherwise known as Notes. And then on page 1, you should see a list of websites where users can acquire digital skills. The nice thing about these websites is that I've tried to include a range of websites where you can use the materials on these websites, not only for students who are kind of like, what I would call maybe zero beginners with technology, right? They just don't have the technology skills at all or super minimal. But also other resources and websites that you might take a look at for students who maybe, okay, they have a little bit of technology training, but they really could use some more in-depth training. And also as they get good with kind of the basics, what are some other websites that they might take a look at as they're kind of moving up the range of technology ability? So the websites that I've included on the notes document on page 1, really, I strongly encourage you to take a look at them. I think they're really good not only for EL Civics assessments, but for a lot of technology practices that you want to have going on in your classroom. And so some of the websites, you might already be familiar with them. Maybe over the course of the year, you've actually been on these websites. But the ones in particular that I think people are familiar with are gcflearnfree.org. Learning Chocolate is another one that has a lot of great interactive activities. And then another one that we're familiar with at OTAN is called the North Star Digital Literacy Assessment. And the nice thing about North Star in particular is that it's basically an assessment website to kind of figure out how good you are with technology, kind of where you're good and where you fall short and might need more training. But then they also have a list of curated resources that go along with the assessments that you have been working on the website. So, for example, like one of the assessments I think has to do with email, like how do we use email? So maybe you're pretty good with email, but maybe you have trouble making, attaching files or something like that. So again, on the North Star website, they actually have resources specifically to train people, for example, like how to attach a file to an email. It's at that level of detail in the curation. So I like the North Star site as well. It's very comprehensive. But really, all of the websites that are listed on that page 1 of the notes are very good for learning how to acquire the digital skills necessary that you're going to need to do the EL Civics assessments. Okay, so some more questions to consider for EL Civics assessments. So I want you to think about 2 very related things here. One is I want you to think about the range of digital resources that you and your students really should be familiar with. I'm not talking about particular tools. I'm talking about kind of big technology items that we all should be familiar with. And what is that range of resources? And then the second part of that is, okay, so how do we take these resources and then use them for specific EL Civics assessments? So again, in the EL Civics program, we ask students to do a variety of assessments, and you're going to use different tools for different assessments. But the first thing is really think about, okay, how large is your range of technology ability, right? How familiar and comfortable are you with a range of digital resources that are out there? And then once you kind of have figured that out, then we want to figure out, okay, well, given the range of resources, how are we going to use those resources in particular to do specific EL Civics assessments? So this information is included, again, on that notes document, but you want to go forward to starting on page 2. So when we go to page 2, the first thing that you're going to see is that list of digital resources for EL Civics assessments. And when you look at this page in particular, I think you'll get a sense of what it is that I'm asking about, right? So when I think about the range, like what is it that I need to know how to do to kind of function on a daily basis using technology, right? So email is important for sure, okay? The next thing is a lot of us are using either Google products or Microsoft products, right? People tend to be kind of, one or the other. As you get more savvy, you'll find that there's a lot of overlap between the two. And I feel pretty comfortable, for example, being able to go between using Google and using Microsoft. But I find that, in schools these days, we tend to be kind of using one or the other, or in the workplace, we're using one or the other. So, how comfortable are you with the various applications that are available either through Microsoft Office or through G Suite for Education? Okay, the next thing that I think a lot of us are familiar with or should be familiar with are what I call, this broad category of like forms, surveys, questionnaires, checklists, for example, being able to maybe create those and then also being able to administer them and complete them as well, right? Because when we come to the students and the assessments, we're going to be asking them to complete maybe like a questionnaire, for example, or maybe a an EL Civics assessment that we used to administer on paper in print, we've been able to convert that assessment into a digital format. And I think the form, the Microsoft form or Google form or survey, like a SurveyMonkey survey, is a really handy tool to use for a lot of those assessments. One, because the student is able to basically, enter the information that they need to directly into the form. But two, as a teacher, you can, depending on the questions that you're asking, you're able to use that form for grading purposes as well. And it's all kind of one complete package. So from the teacher point of view, it's very helpful to use forms because to do the administering, but then also to do the grading and the recording as well. Okay, and then some of the other resources that I think would be really helpful to be familiar with are what I call infographics software, a program like Canva or Pictochart or Venngage. There are a lot of similar programs that are out there. But these infographics programs are really handy to create some of the assessments that you can use in your classroom. They're visually pleasing, but they're also helpful for some of the materials that you want to set up for your assessments. A lot of us over the last year have gotten more used to using a learning management system for our classes, but we can also use them for EL Civics assessments in particular. Again, a learning management system would be something like Moodle or Canvas or Schoology or Google Classroom, Blackboard. There are a number of systems that are out there. I'll just mention that regarding Moodle, OTAN actually offers free access to Moodle for those of you who are working in WIOA-funded agencies. So if you don't know much about Moodle, you can definitely contact OTAN about Moodle, and we can do maybe do a training at your school, for example, to help you learn more about that. And then a couple of other things that I find really useful and handy when I'm working with technology. So one is that this use of templates, right? A lot of these tools that we're going to talk about and that you may be familiar with have these built-in templates. And so they're very useful to help you save time. There's no reason to create things from scratch when you can just use a template that's already built into the technology tool and customize it for your particular situation. So I'd really encourage you to explore if the tool in particular has templates that you might be able to use. And that will give you kind of a head start with getting the assessment set up. The other tool that I like to recommend is what I call a URL shortener. So a URL is basically a website address, right? And if you have experience with Microsoft Forms or Google Forms, for example, you'll find that when you create the form and you look at the website address, it's this long string of gobbledygook that you would never be able to replicate. You'd never be able to like tell somebody, okay, type this into the address bar, right? And then give them this like 2 minute long website address. So we recommend using what we call a URL shortener. I use a bit.ly. Bit.ly.com is super handy. That's what it's Google's site. So I've created a shorter bit.ly with something that's a lot for, rolls off the tongue a lot easier, and it might be able to actually just tell somebody, okay, write down or copy this website address, bit.ly/2021 capital ELC lowercase digits. So yeah, I would definitely encourage you to take a look at that. Not only for your civics assessments, but also for your practice in general. Okay, so once you have kind of a sense of the range of digital resources that you can use for EL Civics assessments, then the other thing that I'd like you to think about then is, okay, so I kind of know what these tools are about. How am I going to use them for my EL Civics assessments, okay? So on the notes document, you want to scroll to page 3. And so the remainder of the notes document, pages 3, 4, and 5, is going to be a long chart of information for you to use for your EL Civics assessments. So again, remember that the starting point, remember back on that slide that had the scale on it, let's remember the starting point for EL Civics assessment. So the starting point is optimally the list, the chart, the letter, the email, the form, the report will be created or completed on a computer. And then this creation will be sent to the assessor electronically, okay? So I want to take a minute to explain what you're going to see on the chart at the end of the notes document. So basically there are 3 columns here. First column on the left is assessment. Second column is a tool or tools to use. And then the third is how we're going to send this thing to the assessor. So let me give you an example. The first assessment that's listed is to create a list. Okay, it's a very common assessment, EL Civics assessment. We're asking students to make lists of, and then, you know, whatever it is that they're making a list of. So, okay, so how do we do this electronically, right? How do we use digital resources to do this EL Civics assessment? So I've given you a couple of suggestions for tools that you might use for this particular assessment. The first one I list is to have the student use a Microsoft Word doc to create the list, okay? The second one is to create a Google Doc. The third one is if you're working with an LMS already, again, Moodle, Canvas, Schoology, Google Classroom, you might create an LMS assignment where the student can enter the list directly into the assignment and then submit that electronically to the teacher or the assessor, okay? So again, for the particular assessment, I try to list as many tools as I can think of that you can use in your particular situation, okay? And then the third column, the one on the far right, is how to send this to the assessor. Now, this will depend, you know, depending on the tool that you're using. And what I tried to do in the third column, in general, with how to send to the assessor, was in my mind to list the easiest way to do it, and then more advanced ways would come after that, okay? So for example, let's go back to the using a Microsoft Word doc to create a list, right? So in the third column, I list a couple of ways that you might consider sending this to the assessor. So the first way that I listed was to email it to the assessor. So in my estimation, okay, again, sitting in OTAN, not in your agency, but in my estimation, I believe that emailing it to the assessor is an easy way to send it to the assessor, or maybe the easiest, okay? Another possibility that I listed was to share it to a OneDrive, a teacher OneDrive, okay? Now, this might be a little bit more complicated. You know, it would require the student to know, you know, first of all, what is OneDrive in the Microsoft, you know, environment? And then as a student, how would I be able to actually share it to the teacher or assessor OneDrive so that the assessor would be able to see what the student has completed, okay? So again, in my estimation, sitting at OTAN, this would be a more advanced way for the student to share the creation with the assessor, okay? So again, I think that emailing it first would be the easiest way to do it, and then second, sharing it to a OneDrive would be a more advanced way to do it. Now, again, you know, we had a very different conversation a year ago, pre-COVID, and now sitting a year later with all the technology skills that people have acquired over the year. You might, you know, being able to share to a OneDrive, for example, might be very easy for your students and yourself. You know, being able to kind of navigate that environment. But, you know, I tried to give you a couple of options so that if you're not familiar yet with like Google Drive or OneDrive or Google Classroom, for example, that there are other ways to do it, okay? So again, this chart, first column of the assessment, so I tried to, you know, I went through all the CoApps and I tried to basically boil it down to the list of the most repeated assessments that we ask students to do. So for example, creating a list, creating a chart, writing a letter, writing an article, writing an email, completing an application, completing a report, completing a form, completing a checklist, a questionnaire, a survey, completing a worksheet, maybe making a presentation. That's where you might want to use a program like, you could use PowerPoint or Google Slides, but you could also use a program like an infographics program like Canva, for example. labeling a map, creating a booklet, creating a timeline, creating a resume. So again, I tried to come up with like all the different assessments that are out there as the starting point, right? And then for each of those assessments, thinking about some tool or tools that you might consider using for the assessment. And then depending on the specific tool, how are we going to get that assessment, that completed assessment, to the teacher, to the assessor? And again, if we think back to the range of technology skills and abilities and digital resources that are out there, that's really, what is it that you and your students are comfortable with? And then, taking that knowledge of your level of ability and comfortability, being able then to complete the EL Civics assessments. So hopefully that chart is clear. Okay, so for the rest of the presentation, I wanted to let you know about some other resources that you might consider taking a look at for the EL Civics assessments that you're going to be not only working on in class with your students, but then also when it comes to the assessment part of it at the end of the unit, right? So I wanted you to know, if you weren't already familiar with it, that actually OTAN has a number of EL Civics courses created. We've done some updating of those courses in the past year or so. And again, those are freely available to EL Civics teachers who work at WIOA-funded agencies. Those courses are housed on our OTAN Moodle site. The official address of the site is adultedcourses.org. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to go to that website, adultedcourses.org, and you're going to go ahead and create an account on that website. Once you do that, from the home page, at the very top, or not at the very top, but you're scrolling down a little bit from the top, you should see a section called Sample Courses. And then within Sample Courses, you will see a category called EL Civics Courses. So once you have your account created, you can go take a look at those EL Civics courses. Basically what you're doing is you're copying a sample of a particular course into your own account. And this will give you a view of what are the materials that are actually included in those EL Civics courses. They're really meant to be instructional materials, and there's a variety of them. And we don't have all of the CoApps and all of the civics objectives covered. We tried to get a number of them that a lot of teachers are using, quite regularly. So you should see a lot of familiar ones there once you go to the EL Civics courses section. So again, this is the website, adultedcourses.org. When you come to this website, you should see our logo in the upper left-hand corner, a welcome message, and then once you scroll down a little bit from the welcome message, that's where you will see the shared courses category, and then from there you can select the EL Civics shared courses. I've also included a document on the Google site, again, bit.ly/2021, capital ELC, lowercase digits. It's a document called Digital Resources for EL Civics Instruction. So I wanted to, I've come across a number of tools over the years that I think are really handy to create some helpful resources that you can use to create instructional materials in your classes and for your EL Civics units. So basically I have this again in a chart format. On the left-hand side, I start off by saying I want to use, so what is the particular material or instructional material that you want to use, okay? And then the middle column is a tool or maybe a couple of tools that you can use to create this instructional material. And then the right-hand column is actually kind of an explanation as to what is the instructional material that you're actually creating, right? So I'll just give you an example from the top. So the first item is I want to use an ID card as an instructional material, right? So, an ID card with like a picture and maybe some contact information or demographic information. So I found a tool called Badge Maker. And in the chart, you should be able to link, if you click on the Badge Maker link, you should be able to go directly to the Badge Maker website. And then what you're creating is an ID card with personal information that you can then use as an instructional material for your civics assessment, or in your instruction leading up to the assessment. So I have a kind of a one-page list of a variety of tech tools that I've found over the years that I think are really handy. I wanted to share that list with you so that you can also use these resources to create instructional materials for your assessments and for your classroom instruction. Okay, one other document that I've included on the Google site is a document that's called How to Create a Fillable Microsoft Word Form. I know that a lot of us like to create fillable forms. That would be super handy to have available for students for some of the assessments that we want to give them. So I've included a handout on how to create a fillable Word form. It's really easy to do. I think it's about 4 pages or so in particular, but I've also included the screenshots because I want you to see, as you're working on your Microsoft Word form, what the various pages look like. And when you're creating things in particular, like let's say, for example, you want to add a fillable checklist on your form, then one of the pages will kind of give you a screenshot of what you're looking at on your Word doc as you're creating your checklist, for example, or as you're creating like a fillable box on your Word doc. So for those of you who are kind of familiar with Microsoft Word, I want you to give you some information about how you can create your own fillable form. Okay, so I'm coming to the end of my presentation. First of all, I want to say thank you for listening to my presentation. Hopefully you've gotten some good information. I do want to encourage you to check the CASAS website for information on the scheduled Zoom forum Q&A that is coming up hopefully soon. You'll have a chance to meet with me live to talk about any of the resources that I've included today. If you have questions or if you want to get more information, please join the Zoom session. There is one more resource that I wanted to share with you. Last summer in 2020, I did a 3-part webinar series on tech tools for assessment. And I put all of those tech tools for assessment resources into another Google site. Those resources are still available. So please take a look at the, if you want to, the webinar series was really meant to kind of talk about assessment in particular, not just EL Civics assessments, but using assessment in your classroom, and a variety of tech tools that you can use in your class for assessment to do different things. So take a look at the Google site. Again, it's in 3 parts. The most recent materials, the part 3 materials, are listed at the top. So if you scroll down to the bottom and work your way up through parts 1, 2, and 3, you'll be able to get my slides. I have a number of handouts there as well. Please take a look at those resources if you find them useful for your assessment activities in your class. Great. At the end of my presentation, I'd like for folks to do a little bit of just kind of self-reflection. We call it 3, 2, 1. Some of you might already be using this tool in your class. So what I'd like you to reflect on is 3 things that you learned today, 2 things that you would like to share, and 1 thing that you will try. And hopefully there are enough things that you learned today and heard about today that will help you to think about, for your own practice, but also with your colleagues as well, and what you're going to try right when you finish this session today. So again, I just want to let you know about my organization, OTAN. Visit our website, otan.us. We're also active on social media as well. So if you're on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, or if you like to go to YouTube and watch videos all the time, we do have a YouTube channel as well. Please connect with us on social media as well. We'd love to see you there. Thank you so much for joining this presentation. Again, my name is Anthony Burek. I'm a project specialist with OTAN. Please email me, reach out to me on social media. I'd love to connect with you about the EL Civics topic today, or anything that has to do with technology tools or integrating technology into your classroom. Not just myself, but my OTAN colleagues as well are more than happy to connect with you for what you're trying to do in your classes. So again, thank you so much for attending the session. Hope you learned something today, and good luck in the future.